Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today I'm cooking up a Chinese American, really just like an American Chinese dish called Mongolian Beef. If those who are wondering, it has nothing to do with Mongolia. I think it's pretty much just a thing that American people applied to a dish that has beef in it. But here in the States, it's super common, and it actually originally originates from Chinese street food. Although I don't know that it's actually called Mongolian beef in China. But essentially what we're going to be doing is using some flank steak, which is a really cheap cut of steak. And then we're going to be coating it in cornstarch and then doing a sear in it in a wok. So that cornstarch is going to give us this really crispy exterior to our Mongolian beef. And that's going to be, if you've ever had Mongolian beef, the real key to how you get that really crisp exterior to the steak with still a really tender and nice toothsome bite to your interior of your steak. It all comes from that cornstarch coating, so that's going to be super important. And it's actually a technique that I have applied to a whole bunch of different recipes. Now, pretty much any time that I use flank steak, almost, I find myself using a cornstarch coating because it helps get this really nice crisp exterior and just generally helps work the sear a little bit better than it would if you didn't use that cornstarch. Hermina, how's it going? Hello everyone on YouTube. Hello to everyone on Reddit too. So if you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about Mongolian beef, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully it can be helpful, or informative, or at the very least fun to watch. Sometimes just fun to watch, who knows. As with a lot of recipes, I'm starting off by crushing and mincing 4 cloves of garlic and then finally mincing some ginger. You'll find that those two ingredients, they often end up being the first two things that come up in a lot of the recipes that I do, and that's because they work really well as like the fundamental element of umami as we start like building things on top of it. That's going to be a good starting point. So very frequently, if you followed along with any of the recipes that I've done, you will find, especially if they're a savory recipe, you will find me using both of these ingredients. Generally, if I'm live streaming, generally if I'm cooking dinner too, this is probably the first two things that I'll do. Is I'll probably crush and then mince 4 cloves of garlic, followed by fine mincing about a tablespoon or 1 inch's worth of ginger, which is going to look something like this. For the garlic, you'll notice that I didn't really do too much to it. All I really did was give it a really good whack with the flat side of my knife, and then it pretty much just started coming apart. That's because garlic is really delicate. So if you smash that stuff real good, you really need to smash it. I mean, like, give it a really good smack. And it will pretty much just open up all of the allicin and all of, like, I guess you could think of it as like garlic juice. It's kind of a weird way of thinking of allicin. And it's going to release all of the flavor as soon as you it starts shedding out that allicin. That's going to be really important. If you don't start releasing that allicin in your garlic, it doesn't really taste like much. So if you've ever like had the experience of using huge quantities of garlic and finding that it doesn't really taste like anything, that's because it wasn't crushed properly. So the only time that I ever really like find myself tasting garlic that's not crushed properly is if I like actually bite into an actual piece of garlic. So you won't really get any like aromatic or like diffusive flavor from it. It won't really like spread across a dish if you don't crush it properly. But if that is your intention though, so super often I'll do like, say, like a crispy fried garlic topping or something like that. I'll do something like that, and then the intention is really to actually get a bite of garlic when you do something like that. But if you're trying to get it to sort of just like be an element of a dish, you generally want to be smashing that stuff real good. Otherwise, you're not going to taste it. For the ginger, however, ginger is a root veggie, which means that it's going to be a lot more sturdy than the garlic. You can't just crush this stuff. You actually have to do the fine mince. Which is really, in my opinion, it's just about persistence. Make sure that you get your knife running through this stuff real good. And that ought to do it. So that's our garlic and ginger. Next up, you will also notice that if you've ever had Mongolian beef, or at least especially the version of Mongolian beef that we're going to do today. But Mongolian beef, I feel like in general, it's actually not that complicated. There's not that many things in it, which kind of makes the importance of getting that really crispy seared steak really, really important, because you're going to be tasting it. But other than our garlic and ginger, the real elements that are going to pop out are really the only other veggies that are in it is a little bit of green onions and a little bit of white onion. And other than that, it's really just about the steak. So that's kind of what makes Mongolian beef tick. It's all about that steak. So okay, good. Oh yeah, cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. What are we cooking today? Today, if you're just tuning in, we're cooking some Mongolian beef. Which, if you're here in the States, is one that will come up a lot in a lot of Chinese American cuisine. Let's see, how am I going to do this? Because it's super, super popular in Chinese American food. But it actually does have some origins from actual Chinese food. So if you're trying to find out where the stuff actually comes from, it actually does come from some Chinese stuff. So I believe it comes from some Chinese street food. I believe it comes from Hong Kong street food. I might be wrong about that. But for our green onions, so generally when you come across green onions, or when you come across Mongolian beef, probably the most iconic way of doing Mongolian beef is in really, really large planks of green onions. So you'll see like 1-inch long planks of green onions. And usually super often you will see those planks done with the entire green onion. So if your green onions are really, really fat though, like these, I'm a little bit worried. I'm not going to do that with these particular whites of these green onions. And that's because these whites are really big. So if I were to throw all of these green onions straight into our fry, I think that they would be a little bit too pungent. They're really, really dense, and that's going to be a little bit too much. So to sort of cut that back a little bit, I just sliced these relatively thinly on a really, really wide bias to do something kind of similar, but be a little bit less abrasive for us. Cool, yeah. So, yeah, if you're looking for the recipes, I'm sorry, I'm saying this stuff backwards today. But if you're looking for the recipes, all of those recipes, they always live over on my YouTube channel. So if you're watching over on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, youtube.com/WooCan. Those recipes, they come out every Friday. Lots of fun recipes coming out. I believe the recipe for this Mongolian beef came out a couple of months ago, I think 2 or 3 months ago. And it's actually one of my favorite dishes to do with Angus steak or flank steak. So that's our green onions. We have these really, really large, wide planks of green onions. And that's going to be really, really important because it's going to be one of the main veggies in our entire dish. So, much psychology. Do I ever do any seafood? Yeah, on occasion I do. I've been working on a salt and pepper fish or cod. I also like working with crab a lot. So I did a Westlake soup with crab a couple months ago. Time is weird. But yeah, I do occasionally work with seafood, but not as often as I work with other stuff. And honestly, the real reason that I don't work with seafood a lot is because it's really expensive. So like, especially with things like shrimp or like salmon, I've been meaning to do a good poke. But all of those things, they get really, really pricey. So the price tag really starts adding up on those stuff. If I ever get a seafood sponsorship, I'll start doing more stuff like that. But for now, when you see me cooking with meat, most often when you see me cooking with meat, I'll probably be cooking with either chicken or sometimes I'll do like a cheap cut of steak. And that's because they're the cheapest cuts of steak, or the cheapest cuts of meat that you can find. The only way that you could possibly make any of these dishes cheaper is if you just didn't use meat and you went with tofu instead. Yeah. Cool. What else? Oh yeah, so if this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. With new recipes out on the YouTube channel every Friday, so if you haven't caught one of those recipes, those are super fun. Generally, if you see me streaming, there's probably a recipe video that goes along with the thing that I'm cooking on stream, because pretty much every time that I'm cooking on stream, I'm cooking through one of the recipes that I've already released. So super often you will find, especially if you catch one of these streams on a Monday, you'll probably see me cooking through something that I have very recently released. Usually on Mondays, we cook through whatever the recipe that came out was on Friday. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, that's a fun place to be. Lots of fun new content popping up every Friday. Last Friday we did Korean bibimbap, which we cooked through yesterday, which is like a barbecue beef bowl. Friday before that we did a vegetarian dandanmyeon, which is like a Chinese sesame paste noodle dish, which we did without pork, which was kind of interesting. I've never done that before. Lots of other stuff like that. So fun stuff over on the YouTube channel if you haven't checked it out yet. This is our sweet white onion. I'm sorry, I just talked through this. This is half of a sweet white onion. It is the only other vegetable that goes into today's stir fry. So we're going to treat these very specifically though today because they are a lot more delicate than everything else that's going to be in our stir fry. So we're going to throw these things in pretty late because they're really, really delicate. So that's very, very common with a lot of wok stir fries, is that an onion is a little bit more delicate than every other vegetable that often will go into a stir fry. So especially if you're working with things like zucchini or bell pepper or even celery. If you're cooking like a kung pao chicken, oftentimes a kung pao chicken will have a lot of vegetables in it. All of those things are going to be a little bit more durable and like need more cook time than the onion. So super, super often you will see me throwing in that onion really, really late. Like it'll be within the last like 5 minutes. Cool. So next up, I'm going to do our sauce. This is going to be the braising sauce for our Mongolian beef. And in my opinion, the most important part of a Mongolian beef, probably right after the flank steak, is the dark soy sauce, which is this. This is 3 tablespoons of dark soy sauce. And this might be the only dish where I have ever used that much dark soy sauce because it is that important. It's what gives that Mongolian beef that really, really iconic like dark color where it's like so dark brown that it's almost black. That all comes from the use of dark soy sauce, and a lot of it. So if you've never used with dark soy sauce though, it is very, very concentrated. So be very careful when you use this stuff. It is, honestly, it's one of the hardest ingredients that I ever work with because if you go overboard with it, you can easily ruin an entire dish by using too much dark soy sauce. So pay attention. All of the dishes where I use dark soy sauce, I mentioned this. So same thing with pad see ew, pad kimao, beef chow fun, all of those things, they contain dark soy sauce. A really difficult ingredient to work with. So be careful with this stuff, or you could ruin $20 a steak, which I've done many times. Next up is some black vinegar. If you don't have black vinegar, you can also just use plain old rice vinegar. And if you don't have rice vinegar, you can also just use distilled white vinegar. That will also work. I like using black vinegar though for a couple of reasons. The main reason though is because it helps contribute to that really dark color. So we're a lot of the things that we're doing today are going to be in an effort to sort of like drive towards the iconic dark brown color of Mongolian beef. But the other real big reason why I love using dark or black vinegar is because it has a little bit of like a malted sweetness to it. So almost like it has a little bit of brown sugar. It might actually be made with a little bit of brown sugar. I think that's how. Sometimes you'll find black vinegar is artificially sweetened with brown sugar. So next up, that was a single tablespoon of Shaoxing wine, which is a Chinese cooking wine. And let's see. Abolish the fat. Abolish the fat. That's a good username. Where we can get the full recipe? Yeah. Let me link that. So if you're looking for the full recipe, it always lives over on my YouTube channel, which is here. That's always over on the YouTube channel. Some of them have it in the comments. Oh, actually, all of them have it in the comments. But if you're looking for the written one, it always lives also on my webpage too, which is wucancook.com. So either the YouTube channel or the webpage. I think that the YouTube video is going to be a lot more informative than the actual written recipe because we sort of like talk through how the recipe works. So in my opinion, like the folks who are like just following the written recipes, a lot of times the people who are following the written recipes, sometimes they mess up stuff. Because there's some subtle nuances that I only mention in the video. So if you're trying to reproduce this yourself, I really recommend finding the video recipe first, because there's probably a lot of stuff that you're gonna miss if you just go off the website. All right, next up, that was a quarter cup or 4 tablespoons of beef stock. If you don't want to use beef stock, you could use veggie stock, or you could. I think that might actually been. We might be using lamb stock today. I forget. I picked up some bones from the market today, and it would or a couple of weeks ago I picked those up, and I misread the Chinese translation of the bones, and I think it said lamb, or it might have said pork. I thought it said pork, but it might have said lamb, because my Chinese is really bad. So we might be working with lamb stock today. I can't actually tell you because my Chinese is so bad. Cool. So that's our sauce. Oh, I'm going to add one more thing. So I'm going a little bit off book from our written recipe, and I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of doubanjiang, which is a Chinese fermented chili paste. So it's going to give us some nice, like bright heat. You will see me using this stuff to just like kind of add a little bit of extra heat to a recipe when it needs it. The original recipe that I had written, I left it out because we're going to use something else to get us that heat. I actually think it could use a little bit of an extra bump. But in addition to the use of doubanjiang, we're actually going to be using some tianjin peppers, which are dry chili peppers. Which I thought, actually sometimes when the mood strikes, it's just enough to kind of do the trick. But it's a little bit of a subtle heat. So here are our dried tianjin peppers. They look like this. They are very pantry stable because they're dried out. And what we're going to do is we're going to bloom this in a little bit of hot oil. And then once it makes contact with that hot oil, it starts releasing a lot of capsaicin, which is where the heat of spicy stuff comes from. It comes from that capsaicin, which sort of lives in the pepper itself. So it's a pretty subtle heat though. If you're looking for something that like you really want to punch it up a little bit, tianjin peppers, they're pretty subtle. Also, if you can't find tianjin peppers, you could really use any kind of dry peppers will achieve a pretty similar result. I don't actually even know if these are specifically tianjin peppers. I can't remember anymore because I bought them so long ago. They are that pantry friendly. I think these are like a year or two old. Ooh, mala tang. I'll have to look into that. I'm not super familiar with that one. But yeah, I'll add it to the list. That sounds cool. Okay, so that's our sauce. And then the last thing that we're going to chop up today is our steak. So let's get into this. So I actually need to measure this out because I literally just bought this flank steak today. If you were watching the stream yesterday, we also made bibimbap yesterday, which is like a barbecue beef rice bowl that comes from Korean cuisine. And yesterday we actually used up all of the flank steak I had. So today I just got this from the market, so I'm going to need to measure this out. We're looking for a full pound of flank steak today. Yeah. So this is our flank steak today. A couple of things to note about flank steak. Mostly the most important thing to know about flank steak is that, first of all, it's a really, really cheap cut of steak because it has very little fat to it. So it's not a super tender piece of steak. If you were to try it and eat this, I should be doing this on the meat cutting board. If you were to try and do this, I keep forgetting that I have a meat cutting board. Excuse me, if you were to try and do this without, or try and cook it in the similar way that you would do, say, like a New York strip steak or something similar like that, you will probably find that it's going to be really, really chewy, and like, no matter what you do, you're probably going to run into problems with like how chewy it's going to end up being. Not sure that I want to keep this cap on. So in order to kind of work around that, we have to do a couple of things to make sure that the steak is generally just edible. The first thing that we're going to do is cut against the grains. So you'll pay attention. You want to pay attention, especially with flank steak, which direction your grain is running. So with our steak, this is the grain right here. It's going in this direction, up and down, which means that we want to cut this direction. And what that's going to do is it's going to, if you cut with the grain, what you'll end up doing is having this really long strips of tendon going through your bite. And that's going to give you a really, really chewy bite, which is not what we're after. So to combat that chewiness, we're going to be cutting against the grain, which is going to give us a pretty tender piece of steak today. And that's going to do a lot for us, first off. The other thing that we're going to do, also super, super important, is that we want to cut this stuff pretty thin to make sure that we don't end up with like relatively chewy pieces of steak. So cutting it relatively thin, that's also super important with flank steak. Sometimes that's not super possible because it kind of depends on how chewy your flank steak is, but whenever possible, get that stuff as thin as possible. Now that's going to be a little bit difficult if you're not super familiar with knife techniques and stuff, but we're going for like pretty thin pieces of steak here. Coming in hot, yeah, how's it going? Hello to everyone just tuning in. There's a couple of caps here that I don't like. Some of this white tendon is if you see this stuff in your steak, that's a sign that it has a little bit of tendon going on. It's not a big deal, but sometimes it can get chewy, so a lot of times I like to remove that stuff before we start slicing. Yeah. Guten Morgen, yeah, good morning. Or good morning or good evening, depending on where in the world you are, I suppose. We have another tendon cap here at the bottom, which I'm going to remove. Yeah. There we go. Cool, yeah. Happy 420, yeah. Hello to everyone just joining. Happy 420. It's finally legalized here in the States. Today we're doing, if this is your first time tuning in, today we're doing a crispy Mongolian beef that I love doing with a little bit of cornstarch, which is kind of like my favorite way of doing flank steak. Some of this tendon has a lot of tendon going on, so I'm going to start removing some of it. If you've never done a Mongolian beef, or if you've never run into Mongolian beef has a very particular quality about it that's like super, super crispy on the exterior with a really, really interesting and like chewy nature on the inside, which is really, really hard to achieve with the cut of steak that it comes from, which is flank steak. So what's most notable about flank steak is that it has it has a very, very lean quality because it comes from the flank of the cow. So since it's super, super lean, we have to do a couple of things to make sure that it doesn't end up being super, super chewy. The main things that we're going to do to combat that chewiness is cut it very, very thin against the grain. So. Alright, now how to do it. I'm not super in love with the steak. Got a lot of tendon going on. Yeah, cool. So that's our steak. The other most important thing that comes up around Mongolian beef is the cornstarch coating. Cornstarch is super, super important. I don't love this cutting board either. And nix this. So what we're going to do is coat our steak in a coating of cornstarch. So we're going to coat the whole thing in cornstarch. That's going to be really, really important for a couple of reasons. The main reason that it's super, super important is because that exterior cornstarch coating is going to crisp up really, really nicely when we go to sear it. So Without that exterior coating, you could still get a pretty good sear, but it's not going to be quite as crispy as it will be with the cornstarch. Alright, so I'm adding a little bit of cornstarch to this bowl. We're not being very specific with it because mostly what we're doing is just giving it a good coating, and that ought to do it for us. Carpe diem, how's it going? Yeah. Ah, stupid camera. Yeah. Coming in hot, yeah, that's exactly it. So cutting against the grain of the meat makes the strands a little bit smaller, whereas if you were to cut with it, it would be really chewy. So super important when you're working with really like lean and chewy cuts of steak, like flank steak, also skirt steak, really important. Cut against that grain because it will give you a nice like more tender cut of steak. That's like a little bit easier to eat rather than if you were doing it with the grain, which I have done before, and it's basically inedible if you cut if you cut with the grain too much. Especially, actually, more often, or I've more experienced this with skirt steak, which is even more chewy. If you cut with the grain, it can be almost inedible. Yeah. Ooh, Mongolian barbecue. Yeah, totally. Yeah, lots of people actually mentioned that too, but I actually, someone asked this earlier too. But as far as I know, I don't think Mongolian beef actually comes from Mongolia. I think it's just straight up a Chinese dish that I think the name was applied when it came to America. And I don't think it has any origins whatsoever that from Mongolia. I feel like that might be a very common misnomer. This is funny. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so for those just joining today, we're doing a Mongolian beef, which is one of my favorite steak dishes that come from Chinese cuisine, not to be mistaken from Mongolian cuisine. If you're looking for the recipe, those always live over on YouTube. That's youtube.com/woocancook. All of those recipes, they come out on Fridays. I believe this recipe came out a couple of Fridays ago, probably like back in January or February, I want to say. And it's one of my favorite recipes to do with flank steak because it has one of the most quintessential cornstarch uses in Chinese cuisine, which is essentially giving a steak a good coating of cornstarch before we go to fry it. And that's going to give us this nice crispy exterior. Without that coating of cornstarch, we would end up with probably a little bit more chewy and not quite as crispy qualities to our steak. So if you're looking for those recipes, they always live over on YouTube. Lots of fun stuff coming out. Those are out every Friday. Last Friday we did... What did we do last Friday? Oh, we did bibimbap, which is a Korean barbecue rice bowl. And is the reason why I ran out of flank steak today is because we cooked it all up yesterday. Friday before that we did... dandan mian. We did a sesame sauce dandan mian, which was super fun. Before that, I don't really remember anymore. I know that beef chow fun was in there some point. And a couple other things before that. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube and check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun new content popping up every Friday. Yeah. So if you're like short on time, or if you're feeling lazy, you might even be able to just toss all of the steak into the cornstarch and just give it a good toss. I like to be a little bit more careful with it than that because sometimes I find when you don't take the time to pay attention to each piece of steak, you'll often end up with like large chunks of cornstarch, which is not going to be good. So I like to be a little bit more precise with how I use cornstarch, but if you're short on time, you could probably just toss it in cornstarch and it would be okay. But what's really important about cornstarch is that it's the same stuff that we use to thicken up sauces, which I might actually repurpose this same cornstarch with. We have some left over, so which means that what we have on the steak is probably like close to half a cup of cornstarch. There's a lot of cornstarch that's sticking onto our steak right now. So what we really don't want to happen is that let that cornstarch come off into your sauce, because that would be the equivalent of adding an entire quarter cup or half a cup of cornstarch to your sauce, which is not good. Because if you add that much cornstarch to any sauce, you're going to end up with a really thick sauce, which will take it to the point of basically being inedible. It's not good. We don't want that to happen. So in order to make sure that this cornstarch doesn't end up in our sauce, we have to make sure that it's seared properly. So that cornstarch has to cook and then stick to the steak. Very, very important. It has to stick to the steak. If it doesn't stick to the steak, it will go into your sauce, and then you will have basically a jello sauce, which I did before. It's not fun. Basically inedible. Oops. Got to plug this laptop in. Cool. So that's our steak. The last thing that we're going to do is assemble a quick cornstarch slurry. In the cornstarch slurry, it's exactly how it sounds. It's cornstarch plus water, cornstarch mixed into a slurry. We want about a tablespoon. Today we want, usually I go for about 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. But today I'm going to go for a little bit less. I'm going to use about a single tablespoon of cornstarch. And that's because I do think that a little bit of that cornstarch that's on our steak is going to end up in our sauce. So just to make sure that we don't end up with a gloopy or like jello-like sauce today, I like to use a little bit of less cornstarch here. Yeah. So we're going to add this into our saute at the very, very end, and that's going to thicken up our sauce for us. All right. Now. Excuse me while I reboot a camera. This camera has been giving me trouble all day. There we go. Cool. So over on the stove we have our wok. It's going to get started heating up. We need that wok to be very, very hot before we start cooking in it. Usually I like to let it hit that smoking point and then go about a minute past that smoking point. And that's because in order to sear something properly, it has to be ripping hot. That's pretty much the case. Anytime that you're cooking in a wok, that wok better be ripping hot. Otherwise you're going to end up with a very, very mushy stir fry. Ooh. Sub-Zero Scorpion, yeah. Oh, I haven't watched Mortal Kombat in a long time. I'm pretty stoked about that, though. Cool. Yeah. Five o'clock people, am I using my left hand to cut? Yes, I am. I'm left-handed. Lots of people ask about that. I don't know why it's so confusing. Shark Zoo, do I prefer flank steak or skirt steak? I think my preference has always been flank steak. It's also like probably a little bit more common in Chinese food. It's flank steak. And then usually I'll go back and forth between flank steak and then like top cut Angus sirloin, which is depending on like how cheap you can find it, top cut Angus sirloin. If you can find it relatively cheap, I think it's a little bit better than flank steak. But most often, usually when you're working with Angus sirloin, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. So. That's generally my preference. I don't work with skirt steak super often, actually, just because it's generally in the same price range as flank steak. And if you're going to be shopping in that price range, I like flank steak a little bit better. So, yeah, cool. Good question, though. Yeah. So I'm waiting for my wok. We want that thing to be ripping hot, and then we're going to start searing some steak. So what we're going to do is par cook our steak. So we're going to sear everything. We're going to add our steak and then let it sear by not moving it. That's very important to a sear, is not moving that thing for a full 2 minutes. And that's going to start, like, basically, essentially what it's doing is going to cook the cornstarch that's coated the steak. If you don't sear it properly, again, I will remind you, if you don't sear it properly, the cornstarch is going to end up in your dish, and it's going to end up in the sauce of your Mongolian beef, which is not good because you don't really want to add an entire half cup of cornstarch to your Mongolian beef. Otherwise, you're going to have a very, very cornstarchy, gloopy, jello-y mess. It will basically turn into jello if you add that much cornstarch to anything. So, what else? Yeah. For those of you just joining, this is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. With new recipes out on the YouTube channel every Friday. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, that will be the laptop that's streaming behind me. We're always live streaming on there as well as on Reddit. So if you're watching on Reddit, there's also a live stream living over on the YouTube channel. The recipes, they come out every Friday. So generally when you see me cooking something on live stream, there's also a recipe that goes along with it. I think the Mongolian beef came out a couple months ago. Lots of fun stuff living over on that channel, including the recipe for this particular Mongolian beef, if you're looking for that. The recipe videos, they tend to move a little bit slower, and we kind of like talk our way through a lot of the things that we're doing, and like why I make certain decisions in the recipes and why I leave certain things out, stuff like that. So that's a fun one to check out if you're looking for more like a little bit more informative or like more step-by-step instructions to how to cook this particular dish. What else? We have a couple of series that live over on that channel. I think the Mongolian beef recipe comes from our Chinese American hack series, where I've sort of been like deconstructing a lot of Chinese American classics. So the particular Mongolian beef that that recipe was based off of was reproducing the PF Chang's Mongolian beef, which is really, really iconic. I think it's like their flagship dish. And sort of like took apart like what are the American qualities of like an Americanized Mongolian beef. Kind of take a look at like what would happen if we removed some of those American qualities and replaced them with things that come from traditional wok cooking. So the way that I had assembled it, I found that like the Mongolian beef that comes from PF Chang's, it's a little bit sweeter, has a little bit of extra sugar that I didn't really like. So I removed some of those sweeter qualities and replaced them with things that like come from a lot of like traditional Chinese wok cooking. Today we're replacing that with a little bit of doubanjiang and a little bit of black vinegar, and then removing a whole bunch of sugar. So if you're looking for stuff like that, that always lives over on the YouTube channel. Fun spot. All right. So the first thing that we want to do every time that we start wok cooking is we're going to add, this is going to be 4 tablespoons of peanut oil, and as always we want to give our wok a long yao, which is essentially coating that wok all around with that oil. And that's going to create our nice non-stick surface. And then we're going to add our steak a piece at a time. Very, very important. We're being very careful to make sure that our steak has as much of its surface area as possible in contact with the wok. So that's going to give us everything that's in contact with the wok is going to sear. If it's not in contact with the wok, it's not going to sear as well. So the more surface area of the steak that's touching the wok, the more sear that we're going to get. So that means that what I'm doing here is I'm laying my steak flat side down, making sure as much of it as possible is making contact with our wok here. And depending on how big your wok is, that might mean that we may need to do this. I think this is going to take 2 batches today. And then what I like doing is I usually will go for a full 2-minute sear in our for our steak. I like to leave it for 2 minutes. It gets really agitating around 1.5 minutes, because right around 1.5 minutes of your sear, you're going to start wondering if your steak is burning, which technically is essentially what a sear is a little bit of a burn. But the key element to any good sear is that you have to stop touching it. Super important. I notice a lot of people do this too, as they start messing around with the sear. They start checking it and poking it, maybe even tossing it. All of those things, especially with a Mongolian beef, are not things that you want to do. If you start agitating it, you're going to mess up that sear and you won't have a crispy steak. You'll have like a gloopy steak or like a relatively cooked steak. Sometimes it will even undercook. Yeah. You think round steels are a leaner cut, than flank steak? Yeah, I love the really lean cut. Mostly for like Chinese stir fries, you want like a pretty lean cut. I saw someone yesterday mention that they were doing bibimbap using Wagyu beef, which probably was really good. I have like every belief that it was probably pretty good. But generally, if you're cooking Wagyu beef, if you're making bibimbap especially, you're probably doing a bunch of stuff to it. That's kind of going to defeat the point of using something like Wagyu beef. Wagyu beef comes from like a Japanese cut of steak, and it is very fatty, very tender. It's the kind of steak that you pretty much only just want to like give it a quick pan fry and then eat it medium rare. Stuff like that that we're doing today, things like cornstarch, all of those are things that are meant to sort of like combat the fact that we're using cheap steaks. So if I'm going to use a expensive cut of steak, I'd rather just eat it rather than sear it. All right. So I'm going through and flipping my steak one piece at a time here. We're looking for a pretty crispy exterior, so if it's not crispy yet, don't flip it. And then what we're going to do is let that sear for another minute. Usually not as long on the second side, because the steak is going to start cooking through. So I usually go for like maybe 30-45 seconds on the second side. It kind of depends on like how thinly you manage to cut them. North Star Mike, how do you know when to flip them? Good question. Yeah. Usually what I'll do, it's going to depend on how thick you cut the steak. So if you got it really thin, which is really hard to do, if you get that steak really thin, it might be done searing in like 45 seconds. It might even be done by like 30 seconds. Kind of depends on how thin it is. Today I didn't really cut it that thin because there was a lot of tendon going on, so I couldn't really get it to cut that thin. So mine is going for closer to 2 minutes. Sometimes if it's really thick, sometimes especially if I'm working with chicken, it could go up to 3 minutes. But usually what I like to do is flip over one of them and take a look. And if it's ready, if it's nice and browned on one side, it should look like a seared piece of steak. Yeah. Yeah, that's looking good. So I'm pulling out my steak, or my first batch, and then what we're going to do is rinse down our wok. And then reheat it. It's super important, especially when you're batch cooking in a wok, to rinse out the wok. So don't leave any of that stuff behind. So anything that you leave behind in the wok, it's going to end up in the next thing that you cook. So today, for example, if we had not rinsed that wok out, everything that was left behind, so all of like the fat bits and like the tendon, anything that didn't come out of the wok when I pulled it out, would continue to cook. So then you're going to end up with burnt stuff in your wok if you don't rinse it out. So super important when you're batch cooking in a wok, rinse it out in between batches, otherwise you're going to have burnt stuff, which is not fun. Can you come for dinner? Yeah, totally. Cool, yeah. Yeah. So I'm reheating my wok. We're waiting for that thing to start smoking again, and then we're going to be ready to do our second cook. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to add peanut oil and then sear it for another 2 minutes and then pull it out. But while we do that, actually we could take a look at our finished steak. Let's pull this in nice and close. This nice zoom lens. So what we're looking for here, some of this got a little bit burnt, but what we're looking for is all of this nice crispy seared bits. This in focus. So our steak has all of this really nice, crisped up, seared exterior. There it goes. So we're looking for all of that crispy, seared bits. That's going to be how you get a nice, crisp, seared exterior. A lot of that is coming from the cornstarch too. Are woks heavy? Yeah, good question. Are woks heavy? You've been interested in cooking, but yeah, you got noodle arms. Yeah, totally. It depends on what it's made out of. So my wok is actually super, super light. So we can take a look. Here's my wok. This wok, I think this wok probably weighs like maybe even less than 5 pounds. It's probably lighter than most of my frying pans. And that's because you could actually take a look too. The bottom of a wok, unlike a frying pan, does not have a bottom to it. So most frying pans that you'll find, they have a thick bottom to it. So it has like a thick reinforced bottom. And that reinforced bottom is how pans retain heat. So because it's really, really thick, the thick bottom core is going to be the thing that holds the heat. So as a pan heats up, when you like turn down the fire, that's the thing that stays hot. So even when you pull a pan out of the fire, that thick bottom is going to keep things going hot. A carbon steel wok like this one, it does not have a bottom to it, so it only has heat when it's on the fire. As soon as you pull that wok off of the fire, it will drop like 50-60 degrees. And that's like a really, really quintessential part about wok cooking, is that it has to be hot. The burner has to be hot the entire time. So if you get the right wok, it's not going to be that hot. And that is specifically with round bottom woks. Some flat bottom woks, they might have a reinforced bottom that helps retain heat. The main thing, if you're like afraid of really heavy woks, the main thing that I would recommend is be careful about cast iron woks, because those things are really heavy. I used to have a cast iron wok, it was like 30 pounds or so it gets really heavy. But otherwise though, yeah, most of the time, even though it looks really, really large, because it doesn't have any reinforced elements to it, this wok is really, really light. And that's why we can do things like toss it really, really easily, because it's so light. Ooh, what does a big pan? What does having the big pan do when to the cooking? That's a good point. So a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that because a wok is really, really large, you can throw a lot of stuff into it, which technically is true if you are cooking on it in a restaurant burner. You can absolutely fill it up, but on a home burner, like probably what most people are probably cooking on, we don't want to fill it up. If you fill the wok all the way up, so if you throw like, I sometimes run into this problem when I'm doing things like fried rices or like pad thais, anything with a lot of like noodles or fried rice that's going into the wok. We don't want that wok to have a lot of stuff in it. If you fill it up with a whole bunch of stuff, what will happen is the wok is eventually going to start losing heat. The more stuff that you put in a wok, the more heat it's going to start losing, because you're putting cold things into a hot wok, right? So the wok is going to start cooling down. And as there are more things in the wok, it's going to have more and more trouble staying hot. So if you've ever had a stir fry that's kind of like oatmeal-y, has like that consistency of porridge, that comes from a wok that had too many things in it. So when you were cooking, the temperature of the wok was starting to drop, and as it gets lower and lower and lower, you end up cooking that food on like medium-low heat, which is not ever good. We never want to be wok cooking on medium-low heat, because you're going to end up with a porridgey stir fry, which is not good. So on a restaurant burner, super often you will see them filling that thing up, and they'll throw a whole bunch of stuff in it, and then you'll see them just like doing these huge wok tosses where they're just like tossing like 4 cups of rice. We can't do that on a home burner, because a home burner is not going to get as hot as those restaurant burners, which are burning way, way hotter. That doesn't mean that you can't cook in a wok, it just means that you can't fill it up that much. So what we do instead to work around that is we just make sure that we don't fill it up. So we do a thing called batch cooking. So we cook certain elements, then pull it out, and then cook the next element, then pull it out. And then once everything is cooked, then we add everything back to the wok. So that essentially everything that was being cooked was cooked while the wok was still empty, and therefore very, very hot. So even though it's really, really big, we don't want to fill it up, otherwise we're going to lose a lot of heat. And that's sort of like one of the core principles of wok cooking, is batch cooking. That's probably, at least for folks who are cooking on woks at home, that's going to be the core principle of wok cooking. Is don't fill that thing up, or else you're going to end up with porridgey stir fries. So if you've ever like gone to a friend's house for like Chinese food, and you've had like a vegetable stir fry, but the veggies are like really mushy, almost like they were steamed. That's because they were steamed, because they were cooked on such low heat that they just started boiling in the sauce, which is never a good thing. And that's also why wok cooking happens so fast, is because it's happening on really high heat. So today we're going to be cooking some green onions and then some white onions, both of which will only be in the wok on heat for like no more than 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, probably not even 2 minutes today, because those veggies are very delicate. So we're going to cook it really quickly on really high heat, and that's sort of going to like cook off some rawness but still be kind of crispy and toothsome. And that's how you get a wok fried veggie. That's that quality. All right. So back in our wok, we're going to do the exact same thing. So I'm adding some peanut oil to my wok. I'm giving it one more long yao. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. So there it goes. So I'm adding my steak again, one piece at a time. Flat side down, making sure that as much surface area of my steak as possible is making solid contact with that wok. And then just like our first batch, we're going to cook that for a full 2 minutes without agitating. And that's going to give us our nice sear. Leo, yeah, hello from Reddit. Hello to you, everyone on YouTube. For those wondering, Leo just hopped over from Reddit. So if you're watching on Reddit, there's also a live stream that lives over on YouTube. I've been told that it looks a little bit clearer. Definitely on desktop, it probably expands a little bit better. But also the cameras are nicer too, and also the mics are nicer. So if you're looking for that stuff, a lot of fun things living over on YouTube. That's where all of the recipes live. But also you can subscribe and you'll get nice alerts every time we go live, which is every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. That's also where the schedule of live streams live too. So if you want to tune in for a specific thing, you can find out what we're going to be cooking over the next couple of weeks, and we'll look that stuff up. Lots of fun things. Fish MD, yeah, that wok, it's like I mentioned before, it's got to be ripping hot. So you can see it. You can even see all of that smoke coming off of the wok. That's a sign that our wok is very hot. So means a couple of things. The main thing that we want to make sure that we pay attention to is that since that wok is super hot and we're searing stuff, it's going to be spitting a lot of oil. So you're going to get a lot of splatters of oil, which means be careful with your arms or you're going to start burning your arms, which is not fun. So we're at 1.5 minutes. I'm going to let that go for another half a minute before we start checking it. And then we're going to look for a nice crispy seared steak here. I can already tell these steaks on the outside is not cooking quite as fast as the ones on the inside. So usually this is only really a problem if you're cooking in a round bottom wok. But what I like to do is kind of rotate the wok and let some of that oil that's kind of like gathered up at the bottom of the wok, just sort of like rotate it and let some of that oil get to the exterior. So I'm turning my steak one piece at a time. We're paying attention to how well it's seared. And that ought to do it. Yeah. Oh, Hermina, yeah, that also reminds me. So if you've ever watched over on Reddit and you've heard one of the mics crash, so the mic on Reddit crashes all the time. Folks on Reddit are always very kind enough to tell me when it starts crapping out because it craps out all the time. We're also crowdfunding for a new microphone. So if you want to help us buy a new microphone and replace the one that goes to Reddit, That will be very, very useful so we don't have to start losing the mic all the time, which sucks. All right. I should be using tongs. Good fucking food, yeah. Yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite steak dishes for sure. It might even be one of my favorite wok fries. Just because it's such a really interesting and specific way to cook a steak on a wok that you would only do if you were searing in a wok. So this is our finished steak. Yeah, let's just do it on this camera. Here's our finished steak. It is very, very crispy. Some of it burned a little bit. This is mainly a problem when you're cooking on a round bottom wok. But the problem with a round bottom wok, I guess every pan has its own problems. But the problem with searing on a round bottom wok is that all of the oil will accumulate here at the bottom of the wok where the round portion ends. And that's really a problem, especially with searing, because you're not going to give nice even coverage with that oil, which sometimes results in the steaks when you're searing to just sort of burn. So if you're really committed, you could probably just get a cast iron pan out or something, or maybe a stainless steel pan, and then sear on something that's flat, and that way the oil will stay nice and distributed. I just don't like doing that because then I got to clean the cast iron pan too, so if you're trying to keep it to one pan, it'll be fine. Cool, so that's our steak. Next up, we're going to start cooking our wok fry. So you will notice that the rest of the stir fry, it's going to come together really, really quickly. So the rest of it, we just spent almost an hour just prepping and then searing steaks. So the rest of our stir fry is probably going to happen within maybe 5 minutes will be the rest of the stir fry. And that's because since wok heat is so hot, everything that you cook in it and when you start stir frying happens really, really quickly. Which means that once you start cooking in the wok, you don't want to be doing anything else. So we don't want to be cutting steak or cutting veggies up. We don't need to be mixing sauces, stuff like that. All of your prep work has to be done first. So everything, that's why we use so many bowls when I wok cook, is because we're prepping literally everything that's going to be cooked has to be done first. So at this point, all we have left to do is just throw stuff in the wok, so no more cutting. Super, super important. In French cooking, we call that a mise en place, which is everything in its place. So have all of that prep work done before you start cooking. Otherwise, you end up burning stuff or undercooking stuff, overcooking stuff. When you start dividing your attention, then you start losing stuff, which is not good. So, yeah, cool. So I'm reheating my wok, and then once that thing is nice and ripping hot, I'm gonna start cooking our stir fry. Cool. One more time, hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can't Cook. This is your first time tuning into one of these streams. We're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes coming out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So if you're watching on YouTube, that's the channel you're already on. If you're watching on Reddit, it's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. Those YouTube videos, the recipes, they're generally associated to the things that I cook on live stream. So if you're watching me cook something on live stream, it probably has a recipe video that goes along with it. Super, super often it will be the recipe that just came out. So yesterday we cooked up a bibimbap, which is a Korean rice bowl. That recipe came out the Friday before that. So lots of fun stuff coming out on Fridays. Oop, there goes the camera. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, lots of fun things living over there. Excuse me while I put this camera back up. This stove camera is having trouble today. There we go. Sorry about that. So yeah, if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, definitely hop over and check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun stuff. We're also raising money to help replace all of the things that keep breaking, like that stupid stove camera and the stupid microphone that keeps crapping out. So Other than that, we're also working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and check it out. All right, let's do it. So I'm adding, that's a full 4 tablespoons of peanut oil. We need quite a bit of oil at this point. I've been holding back a lot on our sear so that we don't add too much oil to our stir fry. But for this portion, we need quite a bit of oil, so that's almost a 1/4 cup of oil. And then we're starting out with our garlic and our ginger going in first. And then we're just looking for that stuff to be fragrant, so I usually go for about 10 seconds. But at this point, use your nose. When you start smelling garlic and ginger, you know you're in a good place. And then what we're going to do is move everything to one side and then add our tianjin peppers. The reason that we're moving everything to one side is because it's really, really important for tianjin peppers to hit that oil. So it's got to make contact with the oil. If it doesn't hit the oil, it's not going to do anything. It won't taste like anything. It will be pretty because it will be in the stir fry, but it won't taste like anything. It will just be basically the equivalent of like throwing it in at the very, very end. It will be completely bland. So by making sure that it makes contact with the oil, though, once it starts hitting that oil, it's going to start releasing all of the capsaicin that lives in the pepper. And that's where all of the heat from tianjin pepper comes from, is from the capsaicin. And then once you start smelling it, that's when you're ready to move on. That for me is usually about maybe another 10 seconds. Then next up, I'm going to add my onions to the wok. And I like to give these maybe a minute before we add our stir fry, or our steak, excuse me. How to make the beef crispy? Yeah, good question. Yeah. So a crispy Mongolian beef has a very specific way to how you make that steak crispy. The main thing that we do is sear it, so that's super, super important. Before you cook it, our steak has already been seared, so we could take a look. Here's our already seared steak. But the other most important thing about Mongolian beef is that the steak is seared with a coating of cornstarch. And that cornstarch is how you get the crispy exterior with the really, really tender interior. All right. So finally, last up, I'm adding the green onions and my steak going back to the wok. And then I'm just going to toss everything one more time. And we're finally ready for our sauce. So really, really important at this point. A lot of folks make the mistake of just dumping the sauce in. We don't want to just throw the sauce in here. Pay attention. Make sure that you're not over seasoning. This is especially important when you're working with dark soy sauce. So we want to make sure that we don't over season our sauce here. If it needs it, you can absolutely use all of it. But if you don't need all of that sauce, don't add all of the sauce. I think we might need all of it today. The amount of the sauce that you'll need, it could vary depending on a number of different things. So in my experience, that can depend on things like how big your green onions are, how large the white onion that you used is, how much steak did you actually cut up, like how large are the pieces of steak. All of these things are variables that can change how much sauce that you might need. So depending on all of the different things that happen when you prep, that could change how much sauce you need. So this is super, super important. This is going to be true for pretty much any stir fry, but especially important with stir fries that use dark soy sauce. So we want to pay attention to how much sauce we're actually adding and if we're over seasoning. What I want to do here is I'd like it to be a little bit looser. So I'm adding, that was maybe a 1/4 cup of water. And that's going to loosen up our sauce a little bit. And then finally, I'm adding my cornstarch slurry. And that's going to thicken up our sauce quite a bit. And that looks like it ought to do it. Cool. All right. So the last thing, super important, that we want to do every time that we finish cooking in a wok is clean it. Clean the wok while it's hot. So if you have if it's made out of a good quality carbon steel or stainless steel, it should not warp when you throw it under heat. So this is very different if you were using a Teflon pan, for example. You definitely do not want to throw a Teflon pan under cold water while it's still hot, because you could crack the Teflon coating, which is not good. But with a carbon steel wok like this, it's literally just a piece of carbon steel, so there's no real concern about like fracturing or breaking the wok. So while it's hot, give it a good rinse, and then while the wok is hot, it has this very nice non-stick surface, which we've been cooking on. So if you clean it while it's hot, everything just comes right off. You notice I didn't scrub anything. I didn't do anything to the wok. All I did was rinse it in the water, and everything just comes right off. And then just like I do with a cast iron pan, adding a little bit of oil back to the wok, and then coating everything in a little bit of oil. That's going to keep it from carbonizing or rusting. And we're ready for the next time that we cook. Nope. Yeah. Are we in focus? Might not be in focus. Cool. Let's serve this up. I wonder if Gordon Ramsay would say this dish is awful. I don't know. Someone wants to send it to Gordon Ramsay. I would love that. So at this point, you could, if you want, you could probably even pick the tianjin peppers out. They are not edible, so you don't want to try and eat those. They have done everything that they're going to do at this point. So if you're really committed, you could pull them out. I think they're pretty, so I like to leave them in. But, let's do it. Let's taste it. Yeah, really nice and savory. Real nice crispy quality to that meat. Nice bit of heat that comes from the tianjin peppers, really subtle. And that doubanjiang is giving it a nice little bit extra push, just kind of pulling everything together. It also is considerably less sweet than the original PF Chang's version that we had done. It has more vegetables too, so that always, I love doing that with like a lot of veggie or like stir fries, especially Mongolian beef. Like a really traditional Mongolian beef is literally just steak and green onions. which is fine in some cases, but I honestly think that it could use a little bit more than that, because otherwise green onions don't really do anything. So usually if you do that, then Mongolian beef is basically just steak. You're basically just eating steak. So yeah. AJ Tracks, yeah, how's it going? Thank you for hopping over to YouTube. Cool. So, pull this in. There we go. Sapphire Rose, did I expect it to be as thin, the sauce to be as thin? Yeah, I was actually aiming for it to be a little bit on the thinner side. Because what will happen is sometimes, and this is like the one thing that I made the mistake of doing when I was workshopping this recipe, is that if you don't sear it properly, if something goes wrong in that sear, the cornstarch comes off of the steak, and then you'll end up with a very, very thick sauce, which is not good. So ever since then, I've sort of been holding back a little bit on cornstarch. We only used a single tablespoon of cornstarch in the cornstarch slurry today, which is the reason why it's a little bit thinner. And I actually like it a little bit better because it sort of like allows the sauce to sort of disperse a little bit better. But if you're looking for a thicker sauce, add a little bit more cornstarch. Usually, most stir fries will go for 2 tablespoons of cornstarch in that cornstarch slurry, and that sort of thickens things up. So it's really just a preference. How thick do you want the sauce? What you don't want to do is, if you find that your sauce is really, really loose, sometimes the tendency or what you want, or what you feel that you want to do, is try and reduce the sauce, because that's something that we would do in like a bolognese, for example, where we try and get it to reduce by cooking off moisture. So we don't ever want to do that in a wok stir fry, because you're going to start tenderizing the things that are in it. So our onions, specifically our onions in our steak, would start getting really, really tender. Which is not good. Then you're going to start getting a really, really mushy stir fry. So that's a really, really essential element to a lot of French cooking and Italian cooking, where we reduce the sauce by cooking off moisture. You don't want to do that in wok stir fries, because you're going to end up with mushy stir fries. So if you find that it's looser than you'd like, add a little bit more cornstarch and we'll start tightening up. But don't try and reduce. That's not going to work. Yeah, the thinner is a little bit better for spreading over rice, but it's all a preference. So if you want it thicker, add a little bit more cornstarch. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. All right, I think I answered everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST, with new recipes out every Friday. So if you're looking for those recipes, they always live over on the YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/WooCanCook. Lots of fun new recipes coming out. This Friday coming up is going to be a Chinese steamed egg dish called jianji donggeng, which is it's actually the dish that my mom used to make for me whenever I got teeth pulled. So if I ever when I got my wisdom teeth pulled out, or if I ever lost a tooth, it's the dish that my mom used to make, because you don't actually really need to chew. It's basically just like a really, really loose egg custard. But it's also one of my favorite Chinese breakfasts because of that, because I've been eating it since I was a little kid. And maybe reminds me a little bit of being sick. So, but still one of my favorites. So that's coming out this Friday. Friday after that, I think in 2 weeks, is going to be Pad Ki Mao, which is going to be really, really fun. So lots of fun new content coming up. If you're looking, there's a couple of different series that live over on the channel. So this particular Mongolian Beef is part of a series that we've been doing, where I've been reproducing a lot of Chinese American classics. So things like Mongolian Beef, but also General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, a lot of things from Panda Express and PF Chang's, and taking a look at those really, really iconic American classics that come from Chinese American food, and seeing what it would look like if we were to try and reproduce some of those things without those American qualities. So what would it look like if you were to do honey sesame chicken, for example, in the lens of traditional wok cooking. So it's really interesting with those dishes, because a lot of those things don't come from Chinese cooking, they come from American cooking. So essentially what you're doing is just trying to make American food taste like Chinese food, which is really weird, because lots of people are thinking that it's Chinese food. This particular PF Chang's recipe is really interesting, because Mongolian beef actually does have an origin or some sort of foothold in traditional Chinese street food. So that's a really fun recipe that lives over on the YouTube channel. So if you're looking for that stuff, go over and check it out. We're also working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Cool. All right, I think that's it, everyone. Let me know if you have any questions. I know I miss stuff all the time when I'm not looking at the camera, so feel free and repeat yourself. And we'll be back Thursday doing something. I think we're doing some kind of noodles. I forget. I think we're doing pad thai. I think pad thai is Thursday. I might be wrong. All right, thanks, everyone. See you soon.
You're as sweet as strawberry wine. Your bed warm, a glass of brandy, darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.
Leave it with the babysitter, mama call the grave digger. Gone with the falling leaves. Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for peace now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might have had your fill, I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for peace now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, I can feel it still. We can fight a war for peace. Give in to that easy living, goodbye to my hopes and dreams. Stop flipping for my enemies. We could wait until the walls come down. It's time to give a little to the kids in the middle, but oh, until it falls, won't bother me. I'm a rebel just for peace. Yeah, your love is in the bridge for my heart to eclipse. Might be over now, I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for peace now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, I can feel it still. Might have had your fill, I can feel it still.
The club isn't the best place to find a lover, so the bar is where I go. Me and my friends sat at the table doing shots, drinking fast, and then we talk slow. If you come over and start up a conversation with just me, then trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop, put Van the Man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me, said boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too, I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. Now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. One weekend we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. You and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up a plate. We talk for hours and hours about the sweet and the sour and how your family is doing okay. We'll even get in a taxi. We'll kiss in the backseat. Tell the driver make the radio play. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me, said boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too, I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. And now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. Come on, be my baby, come on. 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 Every day discover